It was a very strange place. Many people think King's College is just like all the other colleges, but in fact it was set up by Henry VI as a special foundation walled around by papal bulls and other legal devices to stop the local bishops interfering and also to stop the university interfering. That is to say, until 30 years before James came, King's students didn't have to take university degrees in order to get their MAs. They could sit, or didn't have to sit anything, they just came here. So it was outside the university, and also it was special and odd because only one kind of person came, and that kind of person was very strange. In other words, an old Etonian, because there was a special tie between the two foundations that Henry VI had made, Eton College and King's College. And so, until 20 years before James came from Eton, only old Etonians came here. And so the friendships and the emotions and the social structure within King's were distinct and different from every other Cambridge or Oxford college. It was bonded together. You have to imagine, I mean, Monty had known friends. He'd been at Eton for some years, and then he'd known these people. And then when he came to Cambridge, they were exactly the same friends. There's a famous novel by one of his close friends, E.F. Benson, called the David novels. And
David of Kings, isn't it?
David of Kings is the last of them. But David had come up, admittedly not from Eton, but they were friends Monty had known since he was 10 or 11. And they continued until death, because if you were a fellow, you stayed here until you died. So you'd meet someone at the age of 10 or 11, become friends with them, perhaps very close friends with them, as David did, and remain friends until you died. Well, there's always been an idea in Oxford and Cambridge that the relationship between a student and a don is special and close. It's an apprenticeship system set up in the Middle Ages. So unlike many modern universities where you just see your students in seminars and lectures, at Oxford and Cambridge you have the tutorial system, and therefore you see one person who guides you through your studies, 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 every week. And that's a general feature, and that adds to the closeness. You are a master if you are a teacher like myself, and you have your students and you help them through their studies. But in King's it was particularly intense. There was always the ideal that the fellows and the students would be very close. And so certainly when it was a small college in James's day, the students would mingle in with the teachers. They would go and have sherry with them, they would have parties, they would play games, they would row. There was a feeling of a kind of public school where everyone mucked in together. And that was particularly intense because all these people had known each other and they could all have a shared history of going back to Eton. Another feature of Cambridge and King's particularly is that eccentricity is valued. It doesn't matter if you purr like a cat when people stroke your hands, or at least it didn't matter. You know, people would say, oh, how charming. There was another fellow of King's who had some kind of foot fetishism, so he used to get his students to kiss his feet, or at least his shoes, I think. And no one held this against him. You wore odd clothes. There's still a few eccentrics around, and you know, this was charming and British and strange behaviour, but perfectly acceptable. So it was widely felt that things which now might surprise us, particularly physical gestures, we've become, in a curious way, rather puritanical in the 21st century. In those days, walking around hand in hand or arm in arm and so on in public, certainly within a cloistered, sheltered environment like this, was not considered to be so strange. Well, I can absolutely tell you, because I indulged in a lot of ragging. It's a kind of behaviour which I started when I went to a boys' boarding school in North Oxford in 1950. And immediately I was introduced to ragging, although I'd already had it at home because my uncles had been to these schools. So they used to rag with me. So I learnt the art of ragging and ragged with my sisters and later ragged with my granddaughters. Ragging is a kind of affectionate play, rather like animals playing with each other. There are definite rules. You can't hurt someone and you can't bully and you can't go too far. So it's like a game of tennis which has definite rules, but it allows you to express affection through horseplay. So with my granddaughters, for example, we would pretend to be characters and I would push them over and they'd push me over and so on. And the controlled violence, it's a kind of controlled violence which you use in this, sets up a kind of very close, intimate bond, which is not sexual or anything, but it is physical. So it's like dancing, really. It's a kind of dance with rules. And it's not age-specific. So you rag when you're at your prep school, you rag with your friends at Eton, and you rag with your friends when you come to Cambridge. It might happen particularly, for example, after examinations or after you've won the rowing cup or something like that. It might be helped by a bit of drink, but it's an expression of friendship, and some people now might interpret it, if they saw it happening, as having some sexual innuendos or something like that, but it doesn't at all. It's just playful animal behavior, high spirits.
And a way of letting off steam.
Exactly, and of course it's institutionalized in university rags. I mean, they're called rag days, and that's what they all are. I mean, they're inverting the world, turning it upside down for a day by laughing at authority, and it brings people of different ages together. For example, me and my grandchildren, or in a school, you'll have a rag day where the masters suddenly will, rag with the boys, and likewise at university, the dons might rag with the students.
I suppose in a way it goes back to a very ancient tradition which Monty would have approved of the world turned upside down, and the people, the fool being king for the day and things like that.
Absolutely, it is an inversion of authority and a closeness formed through playfulness, which, particularly in a hierarchical world, and Cambridge can be hierarchical, helps you to cement relationships.
Would you say ragging in a way is a sort of childhood game which then becomes an adult occupation?
Well, I think that's true of all games. There's a rather nice remark by someone about the English love of games. It says, games are a way for teaching children to be adults and adults to be children. And in a way, the ragging was a continuation of this. Other foreigners who've observed the English have said that they always remain children. I mean, the fact that we have much of the greatest children's literature in the world, and the Peter Pan complex, as many people say, and so on, suggests that there is this strange feature of English culture, which is that you never really grow up. You're always a child, and you can easily relapse into childishness or childlike behavior, and that's why we also invented most of the sporting games in the world, because of this technique of relaxing into being a child. Now, that's a general feature of the English, I think, which has been noticed by Frenchmen and others, but it was particularly strong in a case like James's, where you had the same continuous kind of people. And I've observed it myself, because my trajectory has not been totally different from Monty's, in the sense that I went from boarding institution to boarding institution to university, and I've been in university. And when I meet friends, as I have recently, for instance, I'm writing books with some of my friends about my childhood, we address each other by our nicknames at school, 10-year, 11-year-old nicknames. In other words, we revert, and when I'm with my friends from school of that age, we revert very quickly to the kind of jokes and playful behavior. If you imagine living with such people for the rest of your life and then going back to, you can see that it would be magnified hugely. And basically, another very strong feature, particularly of upper middle class, late Victorian academics. I mean, F.W. Maitland, my great hero, the historian, was the same. They're very reticent, they're very buttoned up, they're very stiff upper lip. They're very proper people. And yet there's this childlike element and also the affectionate element. And this is a big clash in their personalities. They can't shed tears easily, they can't show emotion easily, and yet they need to do this. And they usually express it either through acting, writing, painting, whatever it is, and in James's case through the ghost stories, among other things. So I think the ragging is the physical side of it, and the ghost stories are the mental side of it.